We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we are meeting and listening from today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us for this event. We celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters of Victoria and across Australia. I am speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I recognise that their sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this virtual MTalk, Igniting Presence in Conversation with Bruce Pascoe and Vicky Shukuroglu. My name is Kate Donaldson, and I am joined by Manny McBride and Michaela Cornuto, and together we make up the editorial team for Inflection Volume 8 Presence. We're absolutely thrilled to have Vicky and Bruce with us today. Bruce is a Yuin, Bunurong and Tasmanian man born in the Melbourne suburb of Richmond. He's worked as a teacher, farmer, fisherman, barman, fencing contractor, lecturer, Aboriginal language researcher, archaeological site worker and editor. He's written over 30 books, among them Dark Emu, published by Magabala Books, which won Book of the Year and the Indigenous Writers Prize at the New South Wales Premier's Literary Awards in 2016. Vicky is a renowned artist and researcher who endeavours to deepen our understanding and care for the world and each other. She seeks to ignite joy and fulfilment through careful exploration of our environment and intimate connection with its complexity. Scientists, musicians, Indigenous communities, and young people are among Vicky's collaborators. We're delighted to present this event in conjunction with the launch of Inflection Volume 8, and through it we hope to powerfully reflect on country with questions of erasure, ecology, reconstruction and place, while critically uncovering the power of presence in the built environment today. I will now pass over to Michaela.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kate. And hi everyone, I am speaking today from Wurundjeri country and the Greater Kulin Nation. So in preparation for today's discussion, I came across a talk by Indigenous Australian author Tony Birch, in which he said that acknowledgement of country at cultural events in this place that we call Australia is, and I quote, absolutely vital. So we are really looking forward to there being a strong recognition and presence of traditional custodians' voice, place names and placemaking, not only at the beginning of, but also throughout our entire duration of our discussion today, embedded into the fundamental fabric of the talk. So for our audience who have not yet read the journal, in Inflection Volume 8, Vicky and Bruce have co-written a creative piece titled Whose Architecture? The piece entails a beautifully subtle take on the architecture of human and non-human inhabitants. My perhaps slightly naive student reading of the piece is that the prose is unsettled by a poignant awareness of post-invasion trauma, but also evokes ecological empathy and resilience. The piece was written soon after the publication of Bruce and Vicky's new book, which is titled Loving Country, A Guide to Sacred Australia. And so this leads me to our first question for the both of you. I was wondering, is your piece for Inflection informed by a particular place, situation, emotion, or anything else?
Hello and thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land right across this whole nation. I'm speaking from Wurundjeri country, and I guess that piece it encompasses, I think, both what Bruce and I feel about country and the stories that reside within it, and how gentle and careful observation can really lead to greater understandings and better ways for how we can all live together and acknowledge those old stories. Bruce, I don't know if you'd like to add anything further.
No, I think you've covered that very well. I keep on thinking of the dingo we talk about in that story and how that dingo was inhabiting an old Aboriginal home. And, the idea of habitation was embodied in that circumstance for me, that we share homes, generation upon generation, beast upon beast.
So was there a particular, in doing research for your book, was there a particular situation, like is there an autobiographical element to the piece where you had an interaction, or would you say it's more fictional?
I think it is very, go ahead, Bruce.
Sorry, I thought I heard my name mentioned, but it might have been the police. I'm on Newen land now, so the piece that I wrote for Gulliga Mountain is very personal to me, but so is the piece for Bruny Island, where I was introduced to that by local Aboriginal people, and the day that and the weeks that I spent there were very important to me, and still resound with me because of the stories that I heard there. So yeah, there were all of the pieces though really were resounding. That's why we chose them. We could have chosen another 18, and we'd like to do that again, but we had to choose 18. That's the 18 we chose. But all of them, they're just dynamic stories, which we experienced directly. This is not a fly in, fly out travel book.
And can I just add, in regards to the story that we wrote for Inflection, I think it is a really, really intimately personal story with, all the characters within it are of our knowing and, roused up from experiences and connections that we've had with creatures and place. And, while those are two instances, for example, with an echidna or with a dingo, all of it is an everyday relationship that we both maintain in our respective lives, and that deeper history that is within soil, within stone, within the roots of trees is very much present, and our awareness of it is just a daily thing. It is part of our consciousness.
So on that last word, you said consciousness, that sort of prompted me to ask about that shift in characterization and possibly also location that occurs in the piece when you have that aspect of the story that talks about the echidna and then the dingo. And I was wondering if you could talk about that kind of intentional disorientation and that shift and why that might be significant or important. And if it's not important, that's okay.
Bruce, do you want to go or shall I?
No, that's yours, Vicky.
It's mine, eh? Okay. I think that sense of dislocation or unsureness or seeking some kind of clarity, raising questions is very much part of certainly the way that I like to approach writing, rather than spell it all out. And also that slight discomfort dislocation is very much part of this land, as it is in so many other places around the world. Humans have been dislocated, have been dispossessed, have suffered all sorts of traumas, and those times bring really great questioning and unsuredness. And I think it's really important for people to glimpse that even a little bit and to raise questions within themselves of what it means to understand and to think you understand something.
Okay, so I suppose building in that topic of prompting a response in the audience or in the viewer, I was hoping to ask you about your activism work and how so you're well known for your activism work in the improvement of biodiversity and sustainable practices, especially within your local areas. So this imperative of noticing and caring for Indigenous flora and fauna seems to be embedded in your piece for Inflection. So my first question on this point is, how is biodiversity affected by bushfires?
In many ways.
Well, go on, Vicky.
I think, it's so variable depending on the intensity of the fire, depending on the location, depending on so many things, resilience of the place itself. But I think, the Australian bush has grown up with fire, and that's a really important thing to think about, but not fire as we see it today generally in, the dramatic bushfire events that really scorch so many life forms, from the tiniest bacteria right through to the massive old trees. Plus, it doesn't have the resilience that it once did. And so I think context is really important to consider. And certainly fire rejuvenates and triggers a whole lot of growth, but it also changes the balance of an ecosystem in many ways. It can do. And I think we've seen that right across all those fire-affected areas. There is regrowth in a lot of it, not all of it, but the balance has often shifted, and people are still concerned that there's a lot of likely extinctions or certainly local extinctions. And, we've got a lot to learn about how the land was attended to, using fire, respecting fire, what it brings and what it can generate. Pascal, what do you think?
Well, we've done soil cores on this property here, and they're very informative because you can see, a metre down into the ground, and right up until the last, what I would call 4 inches, it's really fine particles of carbon, which are indicative of grass fire, because I think this farm is an old grassland, old Aboriginal grassland. So there was a lot of fire there that was producing fine carbon and not much of it. And in the last little bit, there are big chunks of carbon, and which is indicative of forest fire, of really destructive fire. And when I was driving back to the farm from Eden during that fire event, I was thinking about it today because I was on that road, and there are still parts of it which bear the scars of fallen trees because the bitumen was on fire. This is unprecedented. That is an incredibly hot fire. When I went into one of my neighbour's places, I had never seen a fire as destructive as that. And I thought that they were gone. And I thought all the dogs that they had, because they were running a dog kennel, I thought the dogs were gone as well. They survived by terrific planning and resilience, and all the dogs did as well. So it was a great outcome, but I have never seen a hotter fire, and so I wasn't expecting a good outcome. That bush has not recovered, but this farm wasn't as badly affected. You know, the whole farm was burnt. I saved the house, and my neighbours helped me, and vice versa, I helped them. But the whole farm burnt, but it was a fire that we, on all but about 5 or 6 occasions, we could approach that fire over 5 weeks. We could actually intervene. We could drive a ute up to it, carrying a water tanker, and we could actually impact the fire, slow it down. Malakuta couldn't do that because they lost 70 houses in a few hours. But we were lucky here. So this farm was showing signs of recovery a week later. We had a terrific rain almost immediately the fire finished. The grassland recovered in 10 days. People coming to the farm who didn't know anything about the bush were saying, oh, you were lucky to have escaped the fire. And I pointed to the back garden fence and said, what's that black mark? That's where the fire came to. But the power of the country to recover is incredible. She's a wonderful girl. And with a little bit of rain, she was able to recover. It was wonderful. And the bush around here recovered too. And because the canopy was gone, we've got grasses and lilies and orchids in that bush that haven't been seen for 70 years. And we were able to harvest the seeds from those plants and grow them in our nursery here. And it taught us a lot about what the old bush should be. You know, we're talking about design here tonight. And the old Aboriginal people had designed this country, worked with it rather than against it, but had contributed to the design. And that was a bushland in some places, this country here, for instance, where there were about 10 or 12 trees to the acre. And people say, well, gee, you know, what about all the grevilleas and the hakeas and the wattles and the orchids? And you have to remind some people that the biodiversity that Captain Cook inherited was created by Aboriginal people in conjunction with Mother Earth herself. So that biodiversity that was met with was produced by this much more sparse forest than we have today. It's ridiculous, the forest that's around here at the moment, because there are trees of that diameter and there are 300 of them to the acre. All their crowns touch. As soon as you introduce fire into that, they all burn. And this is commercial forestry. It happens in the national park as well. But the hottest fires in this district were in commercial forests. And because we're producing a tree for wood pulp, we are not producing it for furniture wood. We need to completely rethink and redesign our forest. And I would suggest we go back to that old Aboriginal method of having, in this dry sclerophyll country anyway, 10 or 12 really big trees to the acre with ground plants, the forbs, the grasses, the herbs and lilies and orchids on the forest floor. They're there now because the canopy is reduced. But if we allow the bush to recover the way it was with all these trees that far apart, then we're going to have another bushfire very soon. In fact, on this land here, we've had incredible wattle regrowth together with native hops. I can't remember its botanical name right now, but they're now 2 metres high. And they both of those plants, when it gets hot, they gas. So introduce fire into that landscape now and it will explode. People think, oh, Malakuta won't have another fire for 20 years. It'll have another fire in 6 months if we don't have really good luck. So that's a long answer to the question. But Mother Earth can recover. But humans have interceded on this continent and we need to intercede again. And we need to be sensible. there's no such thing as a virgin forest in Australia because, that's a vast generalisation. But in most cases, what people see as virgin bush, in general terms, has been logged twice, minimum.
I like that phrase you used of redesigning the forest. I thought that was great. And that ties into my next question about this chapter in Loving Country on Namadgi, in which you have these photographs and this story of cool controlled burns. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit about this story and the circumstances surrounding it.
Vicky, this is yours because I was just a guest there. You were in your domain.
Yes, so I did an arts residency in Namadgi National Park in partnership with the National Botanic Gardens and Craft ACT, and had the incredible privilege of being there for about 4 weeks and just really getting to know that country and walking through there every day. And I think that's part of why that dingo was so welcoming. I think he knew my scent. But in that time, developed relationships with some of the local mob, the Ngunnawal people, but also some of the Murrumbung Ranger group who work out in that bush and through Tidbinbilla and surrounding areas. And one of those photos is from a cool burn, cultural burn in Canberra, right near the Chinese embassy. So, really demonstrating what's possible in really urbanised areas when people are going carefully and, practicing what is well known. And another one is also from an area near Tidbinbilla where a few people were firing that country partly to protect the paintings in the rock shelters and, really caring for that history in a way that is relevant today. And so, there's a lot of knowledge to be attended to. There's a lot of knowledge to be shared. And I think we were really fortunate to be there at that time and welcomed into that process. And Bruce was there at the time too. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Bruce.
No, I just think that demonstration of that burn you referred to indicates that you can burn hard up against a suburban area and be safe. The other occasion where we saw a burn was on in some cave complexes close by, where local Aboriginal people were doing a cool burn inside the cave, and there's artwork in those caves, and the purpose of doing the burn was so that there was no litter left in those caves, so that come a bushfire, it wouldn't get so hot in there that it would exfoliate the art. Because that's what happened in the big Canberra fires some years ago, that a lot of the art exfoliated. And I saw it happen in the Sydney Basin as well, where art was destroyed, not by the bushfire, but by the walkways, the pine walkways that had been installed by national parks. No one meant that to happen. There wasn't malice involved. There wasn't stupidity involved. It was just an unawareness. And we can learn from all those things. So we burn here, and we're talking about it now because we've got one more to do with the local Yuan mob. And it's incredible that it's December and we can do one more burn. But we always say here, if you can't walk through that fire with a pair of Blundstones, then it's too hot. So what we do here is we walk backwards and forwards across that flame front. And you can do that easily. And if we can do it, so can the animals. We've just seen an animal here I've never seen in my life before. I don't know what it is. It's not a phascogale. There's something or other called a planigale. We think it might be one of those. But we're burning for that animal. We know what its capabilities are. We're burning for that animal so that whatever that animal needs to survive, that's the temperature of that fire. And it'll be slow enough for every animal to understand and do something about it. And it's an exciting time for us. We're 3 of the people working on the farm go through UN law, and part of that law is fire. So every few months, every few weeks at the moment, we're practicing that law. So Australians can be reassured that Aboriginal people are still practicing the old law. And, you know, there is stuff that we don't know that we would like to know, but we have to concentrate on the positives. We know this because we've been told by that old man, that old lady, that this is how things used to work. And so with thoughtful practice, we can refine our methods and get closer and closer to a safe procedure. And that's exactly what the old people did, because, you know, it makes you smile and weep at the same time to see the films of the old people burning and walking through it in bare feet. Now, you know, our safety measure is walk through it with a pair of Blundstones, because Australia's a very litigious country now. Thank you, Donald Trump. But to be able to get closer and closer to how the old people looked after country is our ambition and our pride. Pride's probably the wrong word, but we're pleased to be able to look after country like that because of we come from Mother Earth, we're going back to Mother Earth. And we don't own her, she owns us. So everything we do is for her. Absolutely everything we do on Earth is for her. As soon as we realise that, the better off we'll be. You know, my grandkids and I have competitions about who's the most ecologically sensitive person, and they chastise me about my soft plastics reclamation, and I chastise them about wasting food. We have a lovely relationship.
Okay, so my next question is, how might one begin to tackle design in a way that cares for country? So we realise that, of course, your areas of expertise are not necessarily design, and this is precisely why we ask you this question, as designers and architects do sometimes have a tendency towards insularity.
Insulation's good. In a house, terrific.
I think, you know, if we contemplate what design really means, or what it can mean, surely it means it involves observation with all our senses and responsiveness. And I think it's one of those things that here in Australia, we could all really contemplate how we are responding to what is present and what we are blocking ourselves off from. You know, a house can be 4 walls with some windows, or it can be a really welcoming space that reduces the blockage or the barrier between earth and where we live. You know, people spend large amounts of time in a house, even while we're sleeping, the difference of sleeping indoors compared to in the world is significant. For me, there is no such thing as outdoors. It simply is. The only thing that isn't is indoors. So if we contemplate design as a way for how we can be responsive to that isness and to everything that is within it, I think we'd have a very different sort of world. And imagining it is really kind of thrilling and exciting and makes me smile about how we can, the opportunities are extraordinary if we can contemplate that way and, increase the fresh air in our lungs, increase the awareness of the butterflies and the worms and the phascogales and the kangaroos and the eagles and the fish in the rivers and the sea. If that's what we make all our design decisions through that prism, and with those in mind at all times, I think our solutions would be quite extraordinary. Humans are incredibly capable, and through time, you can see a lot of the inventions from the earliest, whether it's a boomerang. As I walk every day I'll see a leaf coming down in that pattern. And you can see those beautiful relationships and observations where people go, that's possible to be reinterpreted, responded to, and transferred. So I think, there's just so much scope. We just need to get on with it.
Do you have anything to add to that, Bruce, about designing for country?
I think if we're talking about caring for country, we do have to know her, and we have to reform our cities as much as we have to reform our houses, so that we are closer to the earth. When we talk about these things, we have to talk about population, and the world's population is too great. People say, the world can feed these people, but in doing so, we're destroying the earth. The kind of agricultural practices that are happening now are not sustainable. So we're going to destroy the earth in the pretense that we can feed an ever increasing population. And there are too many people. Now, politicians don't want to talk about it, but it does talk about design, city design, town design, house design. And we're going to have to face this eventually. And I think we're going to have to face it in the next couple of decades. And I'm a bit distracted because my arthritic dog wants to come in. So when I finish speaking, I'm going to let her in here. But it dismays me that we can have all these conversations about sustainability, but we never talk about population. We do have to talk about the number of animals on the planet. Koalas aren't as good at negotiating their population as they were, but kangaroos are nearly perfect. Fish are nearly perfect. Humans are terrible.
And I think on that issue of population, I think we can't look at population without contemplating consumption. And, Australians are shocking when we compare ourselves to all sorts of countries right across the world. We really go far above, whether it's house size, whether it's consumption of textiles, whether it's consumption of alcohol, whether it's consumption of all sorts of things, and the waste that we produce and how little we do to address that waste and to ensure that those loops are closed is, raises a lot of questions about our integrity, I think, and what we really believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. During COVID, companies were trying to invent products that would cheer people up, in lockdown, and anything that could help a family of 5 in a 2-bedroom flat, I'm all for. But one of those things was, I don't know what it was called, cheese relief or something like that. And you would get, you could buy online 4 blocks of cheese, like that, like a camembert and 3 other pieces. And it comes in a box that is covered inside in alfoil. Inside that there's another box. Inside that there's another box. Inside that there's another box with 3 little pieces of cheese, and they sit on some kind of chemical that will stay frozen for a period of time. None of it is recyclable in my town. Except the cheese. I could turn the cheese into something else.
I think that brings to mind, when I was preparing for this talk, I heard an anecdote that you mentioned, Bruce, about a loaf of bread where the packaging deteriorated before the bread did because of all the ingredients in it. But on a more positive note, Vicky, I was wondering if maybe you could please share your screen with some of the beautiful photographs that you took for your piece in Inflection. And I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a bit about the process and the journey surrounding the taking of these photographs.
Yeah, sure. So the photographs are, I think all of them are from that period in Namaji, where I really had a lot of time for that intimate connection, really understanding, observing, and paying attention to the things that I always pay attention to, but now had time to sit and photograph and take videos for days. So this one here is a still from a video, and it's the dewdrops on a spider web. And this spider web was built around barbed wire, and the barbed wire within it had also caught native grass seed from panicum, which is a really important food source for all sorts of creatures, including the indigenous peoples across large parts of the country over thousands of years probably. And it's such an interesting question that it raises when we have barbed wire in the mix about everything to do with our perception of containment, farming, consumption of meat, what it means to put that really aggressive material into the landscape. And yet today, we can also marvel at this spider web that has made its home there.
That's, really beautiful to hear that story behind it. I didn't know that was the case.
And this is the dingo that we mentioned before, which was an extraordinary experience that also in Namaji, that was never to be forgotten. An incredible humour in this animal here, who was very cautious at the start when we first spotted him and unsure about us, but also really keen to find out who we were and to come and probably, he looked like he wanted to have a play. He was sort of bowing like a domesticated dog and champing on some cassinia and making all sorts of noises, and really showing us his sore foot. And coming closer and closer, he came within not even 2 meters until something frightened him from the distance and off he went. But that dingo inhabits my mind every day. He's there. I wonder about him, and I'm sure Bruce probably feels the same. Bruce, do you want to say anything about our friend here?
Yeah. He got very close, but all of a sudden he looked to his right, and something frightened him. Now, it was probably something that he could hear, or that we couldn't. But whatever it was, that he had been limping up to that point, but he spun around and took off and didn't limp once. Now, it might have been because of his need to get away, because of whatever he'd heard. It was the most extraordinary animal, extraordinary experience. It's lovely to see the photograph. But I was thinking about the photograph before with all the little worlds, that cosmos of life on the barbed wire fence. Quite extraordinary. If you look closely at that photograph, you can see one of the beads in the middle. You can see the surface tension where it joins the web. Quite an amazing photograph.
These are some of the tours and shelters in that area. So Namaji is an incredible cultural sort of place, I guess. The word itself doesn't do anything justice, but it's a really powerful meeting place, a journeying place of sharing and celebrating and understanding human life in a particular site and far beyond that, and the stories that travel across the country. And so through Namaji, there are shelters and engravings and paintings and manipulated trees and, all sorts of rock arrangements. What's that?
Rock walls.
Rock walls. I think here's a photo of a wall. Signs of sophisticated processes because of, human interaction with the place and other groups in that area over a very long period of time.
Well, thanks. I think it was really special to have those insights into the photos. I think maybe now I'll ask another question. Would you like to talk about this photo as well?
This is from a really extraordinary sort of grandmother tree, a very significant tree in all sorts of ways that also provides home for innumerable creatures. And this is one little home. And, I think when we contemplate what a tree holds beneath the soil and right up to the canopy and beyond, it really can expand our thinking and our sense of ourselves.
Well, yes, very beautiful. Thank you, Vicky. I would like to now ask another question. So now we've spoken about the photos, and so now I was wondering if I could ask you a bit about your writing and your process, both of you as, very accomplished authors. So what is your process for writing, and how has it changed over the course of your career?
Bruce, go ahead.
Well, I write a lot. I work hard, and I'm proud to work hard. I was taught to do that by my parents, and there's so much that needs to be done that I don't have much time for people who don't apply themselves, because I see a lot of urgency in the world in terms of looking after not just the earth, but each other, and all the animals and plants around us. So I write every day, something or other. I much prefer to be writing fiction than non-fiction, but I'm drawn to write non-fiction because the world needs to know about this place, how beautiful it is, how strong she is, and to try and draw other people into that world and to show them what is required of a human in the landscape. You have to do the very best you can. You know, you're not just rushing off a piece because there's a deadline or something like that. You're actually trying to craft it as well as you can. Sometimes you're in such a rush that there is no time to do what you would like to do. But in basic, that's why I write every day, because my room is full of notes, because I know that I'm going to use that in this essay, I'm going to use that in that book, I'm going to use that for that talk, and I cobble these bits of paper together eventually. People think the process is a bit scatological, but, you can sew these things together. So that's my process. I write every day, I work every day, and I'm inspired by country. I just saw interaction out there before with Tasmanian ravens. At this time of the year, when the grasses are coming to seed, there's a raven that flies here from Tasmania. And when they arrive, they've got to have a yarn. They've got to talk about the journey. I don't know what they're talking about, but I'm presuming they're talking about the journey, what they're going to do next. And they're very vocal, incredibly vocal. There might be 70 or 80 of them, and they all talk at once. It's just like democracy.
And so also for you, Vicky, what would you say entails a meaningful piece of writing?
I think it has to allow for a really rich questioning. I think it has to open up that unknown, reaching deeper into our, contemplation of the world and revealing things about ourselves that might surprise us, that we might find joy in, that we might be sort of, cautioned by. And but I think as readers, it's really beneficial if we're open and really receptive to our own fragility, as well as our strength. And, I would hope that a good piece of writing touches those areas, because that's how we can listen to those ravens and to the white-winged choughs that carry on here all the time, or, the lizards that might be basking on a rock and might be also communicating.
What about you, Bruce? What do you reckon? What makes a meaningful piece of writing?
I think honesty is really important, and I think people understand honesty when they read it. They understand superficiality and pretense. I think the sophisticated reader understands that, and it's really important to be as honest as you can.
Okay, so now bringing it back to that earlier discussion of fire, but I suppose slightly relocated. So Bruce, in your introduction to Loving Country, I have noted that you comment that when the Notre Dame burnt, our press couldn't wring their hands enough, money poured in for the resurrections. So what role do you believe the press and media play when it comes to galvanizing a public response to events and the formation of a public presence?
The press play a role as the public conscience in many ways, and we have to rely on them. It'd be wonderful if we could think of our parliament as a public conscience. But while we only select the greedy lawyers as suitable for public representation, then we're not getting a broad sample of humanity in our parliament, and we need that. We need some lawyers, but we also need some shearers. We need some elderly hippies. We need some young activists. We need dairy herd milkers. We need a variety, car workers. And in Australian parliaments used to be full of people like that, both men and women, who came from a broad spectrum of life. And I've been watching Jackie Lambie the last couple of years, and she sends an email out saying, look, I've got to vote on this legislation. She did it last week. I don't know what to do. What do you think? So you get to vote about a piece of legislation. It's pretty incredible that a politician would do it. And she got into Parliament by accident because of some kind of vote sharing in Tasmania that went completely wrong, and she got in. And she's proven to be a very, very adequate politician. And the fact that she turns around and asks her electorate what to do about a particular problem that she's unsure about, I think that's what the Greeks had in mind when they talked about popularity, about sharing knowledge, and So I think we need broader vistas in our public life, and I got so distracted by the thrill of being actually engaged in policy rather than having it delivered that I've completely forgotten what your question was.
Or maybe that's for the best. I think we're close to running out of time, but I was wondering whether maybe each of you could just give a quick soundbite on, a final message. What can we do as students to improve, improve biodiversity, even, which we were talking about earlier. Anything really? What's your lasting message?
I think, we all need to understand that we have capacity, and each one of us can do something in our daily lives to make a really positive change for other people and for biodiversity. So whether it's getting rid of weeds and regenerating Indigenous flora, which will inevitably bring and support the fauna, to, consuming less waste reduction, recycling, all those things that we really know about, and finding ways to expand on those and to bring those into our conversations with others that we might not normally connect with. And I think that's really critical, that we can't keep talking with the same people or to the people that are most comfortable with. I think we have to find ways to connect more broadly and to find ways to enable more questioning of what is happening.
And Bruce?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We have to talk with people who we know aren't going to agree with us. I think that's vital. And, we have to engage Tony Abbott in environmental discussion and wear his disdain. But we have to keep talking and respecting, truly respecting. He's coming from particular worldview. We don't agree with that worldview, but just accepting that he's unchangeable isn't going to help anything, because the human, as we know, is very changeable. We also sometimes have to choose a life which is not as thrilling or as comfortable as we would like, because of the circumstances of our time. And we have to make tough decisions as humans, and we should be proud to be offered those choices, because so many people in the world aren't offered any choice at all. And here we are, we have the luxury of buying a cheese box or working on a better recycling system. You know, we do have that choice in our life. And, you know, I grew up as a Methodist, but don't hold that against me. But I do believe in hard work, because there's so much to be done. There's so much that humans have to do, and to look after each other, but mainly to look after Mother Earth. I think if we concentrated on looking after the Earth herself, it would teach us a lot about looking after each other.
And I think we all know what needs to be done. We just need to get on with it.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And you know, you could use Vicky's symbol of the frost melting on that barbed wire fence as a metaphor for, it could be the cosmos, or it could be, dew on a barbed wire fence, but it doesn't matter what it is. It's the beauty of it that should make our jaws drop, and determined to look after it as much as our energies and our intelligence can allow us. We have to apply them all to looking after that home.
Well, on that note, before Manning formally concludes today's event, I'd like to express my gratitude to both you, Bruce and Vicky. Bruce, thank you so much for lending us your valuable time and precious words. And Vicky, thank you also not only for your words, but also for your incredible patience and kindness throughout the year when it came to our correspondence. So it's been an absolute honour and privilege for the journal to be able to collaborate with you both. Thank you. It's been really great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michaela. I'm joining you from Naarm, or Melbourne, the lands of the Kulin Nation. So on behalf of the editorial team, the Melbourne School of Design and MPavilion, thank you, Bruce and Vicky, for your not only informative but enchanting words and images today, and for your contribution to Inflection Volume 8. Your insight from an adjacent creative industry certainly provides a lot for those of us in architecture and design to learn from. At the very least, we might consider the gravity of our interventions on the people's flora and fauna of the land. Yours is one of many contributions to Inflection Volume 8 that encourage an attitude to the built environment of sincere understanding and empathy. On that note, I'd also like to thank the Melbourne School of Design, all supporters, collaborators and contributors of the Inflection Journal and MPavilion for allowing us to host this virtual forum. Thank you.